I mentioned before that I'm writing my first novel. Well, the first novel that I've tried to write since 6th grade anyway. Without revealing too much about it, I thought I'd share some books that I've used to do my background research so far. Hi there, I'm Linda Maxey, the author of the Library Lynn Guides to Nonfiction. As I said in the introduction, I'm writing a novel. I'm working hard to learn two major things. First, how to actually write the novel, and second, the background research that I'll need for the things that I put in it. To help with the first, writing the novel, I'm taking a beginner's class on fiction, and I'm also reading lots of books and watching YouTube videos. I've already done one video on this, and I'm going to do another one soon. I'm still trying to decide what genre this book belongs in. I had thought earlier of cozy fantasy, but when I went and read some books that fall under the cozy fantasy banner, I'm not sure my book is a very good fit for that. So then I also discovered women's paranormal fiction, and if you don't know about that genre, it was started by 13 very successful women's authors who wanted a genre that better represented what they wrote. This combines elements of urban fantasy, women's fiction, paranormal romance, and cozy mystery. My book fits better in with this genre, but again, not perfectly. But is it possible to fit in a genre perfectly? I'm not so sure. Anyway, I will say this, my book is cozy and it does have paranormal elements. I have 5 books I want to show you today. They all deal with fairy lore. These aren't the only books I've consulted about fairies, but so far they've been the most helpful. I was surprised to learn that fairy lore is a complex, multi-layered subject with a long history. I can't begin to get into all of that here, but if you're interested, I would definitely check out the books that I discuss here today. I'll also link to some YouTube channels that I've enjoyed that discuss the Fae from various perspectives. It's a fascinating topic. It's very difficult to discuss fairies without going down many rabbit holes. I'm going to try to avoid that by focusing on these books and not all the mind-blowing information they contain. The first is Magical Folk, The History of Fairies, with Simon Young and Sherry Holbrook as both contributors and editors. This is a collection of works by scholars, mainly British, who discuss fairy stories and lore in a bit of depth by geographical location. They cover English fairies, Celtic fairies, and Norse fairies, and American fairies. This is a book I borrowed from my local branch library. The librarian there told me it would be a great addition to my fairy research, and he was correct. I'm enjoying it while learning new things. The next book is one I ordered. It's Angels, Fairies, and Demons and the Elementals, with the Edgar Cayce perspective on the supernatural world by John Van Auken. Van Auken is the director of the Association of Research and Enlightenment, ARE, the Edgar Cayce Teaching Center located in Virginia Beach in the USA. If you don't know about Edgar Cayce, he was born in 1877 in Kentucky. At an early age, he found he had abilities that defied explanation. For one example, when he was a child, he fell asleep on a spelling book. He was having trouble with his spelling homework, and when he woke up, he found that he had memorized the entire textbook. He also talked with angels, and he played with the little folk, with fairies, and his mother also saw him playing with these beings. Later, he became famous for being able to diagnose and give prescriptions for people, some far away and some he had never met, even though he wasn't a doctor. And he did this through what they called his readings. His readings were trances that he would go into. He would lie down on a couch and loosen his collar and go into a trance and then relay the information that came to him verbally. These were often accurate and helpful. If you don't know much about Cayce and are interested to learn, I'd recommend you start with the book, There Is a River, The Story of Edgar Cayce by Thomas Segru. I read it years ago and really enjoyed it. It's an amazing story. In this book, Van Auken describes the beings in the title from the perspective of the Cayce readings. In some places, Cayce addressed these beings directly, and in others, he hints at information about them. Basically, Cayce sees these beings as part of, but also not part of, our world. While they can absolutely be here with us, actually he says they are here with us, we don't have, most of us, the physical apparatus to see them directly. People with certain abilities or levels of consciousness can either see, hear, or sense them with spiritual sight. Honestly, I found this to be really intriguing and a mind-bending book. I'd recommend it to anyone with curiosity about the subject, and it's provided me with a lot of food for thought. The next is Fairies, A Guide to the Celtic Fair Folk by Morgan Daimler. I checked this book out through my library on Hoopla. If you don't know about Hoopla, you need to check it out. You can get access to it through your local library, and it's well worth the time. If you're interested in learning about fairies and want to know where to start, I think this is the one I would turn to first. Morgan Daimler is a pagan priestess who has spent a large amount of time writing books on this topic. She has quite a few related books on Amazon, and if you're interested in the subject at all, I'd recommend you give her books a go. This one has been full of excellent information about fairy stories, both old and new, because her research is deep and thorough. She provides details that I had not found in the other books, and I'm listening to this one on audio. It's been a delight. The next is Fairies, A Dangerous History by Richard Sugg. The book was published in 2018. If you're not familiar with fairy lore, you might be surprised to learn that Tinkerbell is not representative of most fae. The word fae is sometimes used for the whole realm of creatures on that other world. We can see them in our world if we have the sight for it, but not all of us do. Sugg is a British author with titles like Mummies and Cannibals and Vampires under his belt. He takes a scholarly approach and doesn't claim to either believe or not believe in the fae, but he does focus in this book mostly on darker stories, and there are plenty of them about these beings. If you're thinking that it may be fun to start a relationship with fairy beings in a nearby park, your backyard, or your house, I think it would be wise for you to read some of these books first. It's possible you have no idea what you might be getting yourself into. I'm not saying don't do it. That's not my decision for you, but I'm saying there are things that you should be aware of before you proceed. Suggs talks a great deal about kidnappings and changelings. True horror stories have been committed within the past 2 centuries over the concept of changelings, for example. If you don't know what a changeling is, it's when the fairies take a normal, healthy human baby and replace a fairy in the child's crib. Morgan Daimler says in her book that this is often so that the humans can be used as breeding stock to replace the waning fairy populations. But in Sugg's book, this is even darker. Sugg says that in many cases, these changelings were no doubt children and adults who had diseases and disabilities that placed them outside the realm of that was expected as normal. To explain this, people would claim that they were changelings. And the most tragic thing is how these so-called changelings were treated. At times, people were advised to throw suspected changeling children on fires so that the fairy spirit would go up the chimney and the real child could be restored. So read this book with a warning. Some of the stories are disturbing. What I enjoyed most about it was his examination of the role fairy lore has played in literature and art throughout history. He talks about the treatment of the fairy folk in works from Chaucer to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I'll add here that a lot of the lore we associate with fairies does come from the British Isles. That's not the only place these stories are found. In fact, they're found all over the world. I'm quite keen to learn about stories of these beings from other places, particularly the Americas and Africa. Finally, I have a book that may be familiar to many of you, Fairies Described and Illustrated by Brian Froud and Alan Lee. I bought this book when it first came out in 1978. I've always been fascinated by fairies, to be completely honest. Many of you have seen this book, and I'll just show some of the pictures. It's a gorgeous book, but if you're expecting the fairies to be sexy beasts or sweet little flower children, you will be disappointed. People who see fairies on the regular say that these illustrations are the most accurate, and there's speculation that the artists have seen real fairies themselves. I'm not sure if they've ever claimed to have seen them, though. They illustrate and discuss the common fairies you may find around the British Isles. While they don't provide a lot of in-depth information like the previous books, they provide a wide range of topics with fascinating illustrations. The types of beings they cover include the seelie and unseelie courts, leprechauns, the realm of fairy rings, tree fairies, and goblins of all sorts. I will warn parents that you may want to look through this book yourself before you decide to share it with your children. People have different ideas about what's acceptable, and this book was intended for adults. I've been taking notes in a notebook just for this book. I've got snippets of poetry, house plans, maps, charts, and all sorts of things in here. It's helping me keep my ideas together and accessible. So that's what I have for today. Another time, I'll look at the other books I've read, like several by W.B. Yeats and some on plant and medicine lore. If you have books on those topics you'd like to recommend, leave me a comment below. I'm still researching and would love to hear about them. So until next time, happy reading!